Yes, very good morning to you. It's Thursday, the 16th of July, 2020. Welcome back to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. My name's Pete Fairbairn. I'm your host, and I'm joined every day by one of Australia's top journos. And I tell you what, I've had this fella in my sights for quite a while. He's one of the most talented young journalists in the country and a ripper fella to boot. Great to welcome the Sydney Morning Herald's Sam Phillips. How are you, mate?
Pete, how are you, mate? Thanks for having us on. I've been watching intently. It's all going well by the looks of it so far.
Mate, it's going well, and it's only going to get better now that you've graced the show with your presence. Mate, we're going to fire straight into it, and we're going to start things off in the Sydney Morning Herald, your newspaper, with your colleague Georgina Robinson, who's written a story about the search for the replacement for Raelene Castle as Rugby Australia's next chief executive. We know Rob Clark is in the chair on an interim basis only until Christmas. Robinson reporting that the recruitment firm charged with looking for the next CEO has reached out to people such as David Gallop, Todd Greenberg. She also links the likes of Andy Marinos and David Begg to the role. Sam, do you think convincing the likes of a Greenberg or a Gallop, such experienced sports administrators, to take on this role is a good move?
Yeah, I think if they are able to, I think it's a good move, but whether they are able to is another thing. Georgina raised a good point in that story about several people involved in and around rugby who are not sure if they will be able to recruit someone like Gallop or like Greenberg. And Greenberg's, I think, privately, I think it's pretty much known that he won't be taking the role. So I think that is the best way forward, because there is a real mess that they need to sort out and a new broadcast deal to sort out. And it's probably not the easiest job to walk straight into, but if they could get someone like David Gallop, that would do wonders for the game in this country, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting time as well. Of course, the Cricket Australia chief executive's job is up as well. And Greenberg and Gallop likely to be contenders for that, and both have their own history in that sport as well. In general, we know the state of flux that rugby is in, partly its fault, partly not Rugby Australia's fault. But what do they need in their next CEO?
I think they need someone who can do two things. I think, first of all, have a vision for what the new, I think if we're going to end up with the domestic comp, judging by what New Zealand is saying at the moment, figuring out the best way forward with that, whether it's 5 teams, whether it's a club comp, someone who's got a good vision for where the game can go domestically in Australia. And then secondly, they need to be able to sell the game to broadcasters. I think the $10 million figure was floated in the Australian the other day regarding how much the broadcast deal might be worth, and the game's going to need more than that. So they need to find a way to pull some more broadcast dollars in if the game's going to survive as in its current state, I would say.
Yeah, good shout there. We move to our second story now, and this is on the back of your story earlier this week reporting that I think 15 or 16 of the players who played in last year's NRL Grand Final won't be playing in the Grand Final replay between the Roosters and the Raiders this weekend. Jamie Pandarum of the Daily Telegraph managed to have a great chat with Jack Wighton, of course, the Raiders playmaker, who was right at the forefront of that controversial 6-again call. Many saying the Raiders were robbed in that sense last year in the Grand Final. Pandarum sits down with Jack Wighton, who's refusing to blame the referee, Ben Cummins, for that Grand Final loss, by the way. A couple of quotes here. We had a lot more opportunities to win the game. We put ourselves in different positions elsewhere to win, so we can't just blame that. I think Wighton's attitude here is really admirable and quite remarkable. That being said, with the departure at the end of the year of John Bateman, obviously injury, absolutely afflicting the Raiders as things currently stand, has this side missed out on their opportunity to win a premiership with this group of players?
Yeah, I don't think they can win the premiership without Josh Hodgson to start with. A lot of their injury list are looking to come back in the next 5-6 weeks, but it's a shortened competition, as we know. Ricky will have to have them clicking within a few weeks before finals if they do manage to hang on to that spot in 7. It's not like they're top of the ladder and have some room to work with at the moment in terms of games they can drop without Josh in the team. But yeah, Jack's right. Like, you can't really dwell on that, what happened last year. But looking at it now, it might have been their one chance. Everything just they all clicked at the right time, and it might have been their one chance to win a grand final against a Roosters team, which seems to keep getting better.
That's it, and obviously, Sia Soliola, his future a bit uncertain after that awful injury he suffered. We don't know whether Jordan Rapana will be back. And we've seen the emergence of Parramatta, Penrith. They're certainly both better teams than they were last year, and the Roosters, continuing to go from strength to strength as well. So that era or the opportunity for this generation of Raiders players to win a premiership may well be behind us. We're going to stay with rugby league for our big story of the morning, and this one comes from Andrew Webster in the Sydney Morning Herald. It's a great piece, and he's got some fabulous intel into what's happening behind the scenes in the pursuit of Trent Barrett for the new to be the new head coach of the Canterbury Bulldogs following Dean Pay's departure. Webster reporting that Barrett had a Zoom call on Monday afternoon. On that call were Lynn Anderson, the chair of the Bulldogs, Chief Executive Andrew Hill, GM of footy Steve Price, and a couple of the footy club directors as well. It appears that all the stars are aligning for Trent Barrett to earn a second chance as a head coach at the Bulldogs. His attacking coaching prowess, really appeals to a team who are scoring on average less than 11 points a game. But he probably only gets one more chance if it doesn't go well to be an NRL head coach. And I wonder, Sammy, based on his experience at Manly, the challenges he had politically there, is this actually the right job for him? And will he be able to manage all the politics behind the scenes at Belmore?
Yeah, I think Webby made some really good points in that story that he's not the strongest coach to be to go into Belmore and be spat out like Des Hasler when he went there. Was a coach with so much success, a coach who is pretty set in his ways, and rightfully so. He's had such a successful run, but the politics at the Dogs were eventually the end of him, and the politics seem to be worse there than at any club in the NRL. And Trent, who probably have learned from what happened to him at Manly, but I don't know whether that's his strong suit, managing those relationships behind the scenes. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, because I personally didn't think the way he handled his exit from Manly was did not put. It wasn't as sort of, I suppose, there's been talk about how Dean Pay was selfless in the way he went about it, and you definitely wouldn't describe Trent exit from Manly as that. So I don't know personally if he's the right man for the job. I think what Des has done at Manly since Barrett left is, again, not a great ringing endorsement for his coaching stocks, but I suppose this will be second and final chance, as you said.
That's it. And, obviously a lot of speculation around other coaching roles in the NRL this year. We know before stringing a few good games together recently, Mary McGregor under extreme pressure at the Dragons. We know John Morris at Cronulla. There's been some speculation around that role. The Warriors role is available, though Barrett doesn't appear to be that interested necessarily in that one. But even potentially roles of the likes of the Cowboys, goodness me, even the Brisbane Broncos role potentially becoming available. You can't help but wonder whether Barrett would be better off, for example, going to one of his former clubs in the Dragons or Sharks, or going somewhere off Broadway like the Cowboys where he could just get on with coaching.
Yeah, and that's all part of it. And I suppose we've seen the contrasting fortunes in two new coaches this year, in Adam O'Brien and Justin Holbrook at the Knights and Titans respectively, and how different their lists were when they took over and what's probably ahead of them over the next 3 or 4 years. So, look, Canterbury's, when they're flying, and even when they're not flying, they're one of their biggest clubs, if not the biggest club in Sydney. So it's hard to turn a job like that down, and the prospects that they will have to rebuild and be a big club again. But, as you said, there could have been, there might be some opportunities popping up over the next few months that he might wish he would have taken instead.
We will watch that space with absolute interest, but it does appear a fait accompli that Trent Barrett will be the next coach of the Bulldogs. We move now to our penultimate story, and it comes from Peter Ryan in The Age. Obviously, huge news yesterday with the 10 Victorian AFL teams confirmed to be relocating to Queensland for a minimum of probably 5 or 6 weeks. We're talking about games every day of the week from round 9 onwards. We're talking about teams on 4 or 5 day breaks. There's a whole lot of movement in the AFL in that space in general, but I don't want to necessarily go into too much depth about some of that. I want to talk about Peter Ryan's article, which is that the Players Association in the AFL, they want that contract freeze, which is in place, lifted if this season is to be compressed. Essentially, we know that there's been a lot of debate around list sizes beyond this year, salary caps. We know that the AFLPA and the league will sit down and review the CBA at the end of the season. And with that in mind, there was a freeze put in place for contracting beyond this year. But is it fair enough to say now, with the season close to halfway completed, it looks like it's going to be compressed and could be over within kind of the next 2.5 months? Is it fair to say now that we need some certainty around list sizes for 2021 onwards, and that we need that contract freeze lifted immediately?
I think it is fair to say that, but I also think you have to wonder how anyone is going to have any certainty around that when we're not really sure what the post-COVID, if we are post-COVID by 2021 world looks like, especially in a sporting sense. So I can understand why the AFLPA is making that push, and the players obviously want some certainty for what is happening for their own careers beyond 2020. But I also find it extremely hard. If I was running a club or running the AFL, to say, yeah, this is your list size, this is your salary cap, let's go. I just find that a pretty extraordinary request at this time, especially when the AFL is probably the most effective competition in Australia right now.
We've seen, I think Gil McLachlan said yesterday, it'll cost approximately $3 million for the league to move not only the players and the full lists all moving in the state for those Victorian teams, also partners and families being moved into those Queensland-based hubs. And it's a similar question in the A-League, I guess, where we see the proposed shift of all teams into a Queensland-based hub for that competition if COVID-19 continues to grow and extrapolate in New South Wales. And the cost that would be incurred by Football Federation Australia and the A-League, when they don't have a lot of money, the cost incurred to move everyone into a Queensland hub is significant. But the flip side of that, of course, is if they don't put the show on, the broadcaster's not going to pay any money. So you've got to spend money to make money. To your point, we don't know whether COVID is gone for 2021. We talk about a post-COVID world in 2021. We don't know if that's the case. So I take your point. I can appreciate that players want some certainty and want to be able to sign contracts. But I take your point that it's very hard to know what the financial situation will be, and for these professional leagues to understand what their financial situation would be like if they needed to have a second season kind of administrating on the fly like they have this year.
Yeah, I don't really know, what sort of time frame they've put on it or where, when they're expecting a decision. But yeah, I think that's the most important point, is that there's so much uncertainty. It's really hard to sign contracts and do list management when we don't know what sort of money is going to be available to sports or AFL teams or NRL teams moving forward.
Now, Sam, our final story of the day, and I couldn't have you on the show without speaking about some horse racing with you, because I know you love your racing, and I'm trying to lift your spirits because I know you're flat that Warwick Farm was called off yesterday as a precautionary measure. But we're going to turn to a story from Ryan Reynolds in racing.com. He's got some quotes from the Racing Australia chairman, Greg Nichols, who says he expects some clarity around the whip rule to be introduced by the middle of August. Story also details that Racing Victoria has already announced tougher penalties for jockeys who flout that whip rule. However, Racing.com understanding that Racing New South Wales isn't as keen to see changes to the rule. Can you talk me through a little bit of the background of this situation, Sam, with the whip rule? Does it need to change? And do we need to get to the extremes of horses being disqualified from races when their jockeys flaunt the whip rule?
Yeah, I think the background's twofold. Firstly, as a punter, the whip rule is generally irrelevant. It doesn't really, if someone hits the horse 10 extra times than they should before 100, It doesn't ever change the result. It's only a monetary fine for the jockey. I don't really understand what the point or the purpose of it is. It's almost a farce, to be honest. But the second part of it is the optics to the outside world in this day and age. And I sort of, as someone who watches a lot of horse racing, am of the belief that you probably will never please people who aren't happy with the whip rule or the whip being involved at all. Like you probably, if you do get rid of the whip, they will just find something else to complain about in the horse racing game. But the context is that every time a jockey strikes a horse more than they should, and it wins by a nose, the stewards don't ever. I've personally never seen them overturn a result. So I think there is some talk that would change. That but then it comes down to how much does it using the whip an extra 5 times mean over the course of 100 metres? Is it worth a nose? Is it worth a head? It's different for different horses. It's hard to put a number on it. So I'm not really sure how they'll change it or what they will do, but it's interesting to see that they're talking about it because it's been an issue for many years now.
Yeah, I take your point, Reid, the optics, that there's a lot of people who will look to find fault in the horse racing industry, and you take one issue away and perhaps they move on to the next. That being said, it does seem increasingly regular that on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning when you're reading the wrap-up of the major metro races, that there's the list of jockeys who've been fined and disqualified for upcoming meets for breaching that whip rule. So again, one we will watch with absolute interest to see whether the states can align on that. Clearly, I think Victoria and New South Wales, if they have different agendas or different thought processes on where to go with that, it'll be hard to see any major change initiated.
Yeah, exactly right. They're not often on the same page as the two chief racing bodies in this country. So it'll be interesting to see whether Peter Blandy sees it the same way as Racing Victoria.
Sammy, it's been fantastic to have you on the show this morning. I hope to have you back again soon. We're going to have to leave it there so that we can get this out short and sharp in time for people to listen on their commute or perhaps even put it on the Bluetooth speaker while you're in the shower. You can get the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff via Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere where you get your podcasts. Sammy, we'll catch up with you again soon. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Pete. On you, mate.